Welcome to another creative podcast, where creative outcasts come together to share their stories so we can all feel a little less lonely. I'm your host, Janelle Marquez. Hello. Welcome back to another episode. Today, we're just going to get right into it, and we're going to talk about feeling like you're never enough as an artist. I know this is a topic that I don't see a lot of people talking about, really. And I think just because of how deep this could get and also how vulnerable one would have to be in order to share all the feelings and experiences that come with not feeling like you're enough as an artist. But that's why we're here, because we're here to break these boundaries one podcast episode at a time. There are so many times as a creative I have felt like I'm never enough. As I've gotten older, I have felt this more often throughout my career than I'd like to admit. If you can't relate to this, I'm just going to describe to you personally what I have experienced. And if that resonates with you, we're going to get into it and we're going to help each other out. What does it mean to feel like you're never enough? You know, for some, it may look like having low self-esteem. It could also look like comparison. This feeling could also come from not having a support system or a strong one. Or simply just like a negative experience could make you feel as though you're never enough or in the moment not enough. I think in today's day and age where we live in this place, we live in this society where we're often caught in this like hamster wheel of chasing after the next big thing or the next best thing. This mindset can sometimes creep in and you may feel like, you know, I'm achieving, but, you know, when will it ever be enough? When will I ever be enough? And I do think that like this really big age of social media has actually like impacted the way I feel about this, because, you know, social media is technically a highlight reel. And while social media has expanded from highlight reels to a platform like TikTok, where you're able to get a little bit more candid with your experiences as a creative or just like in any like field that you're in. So like you'll see stay-at-home moms get real about their experiences. You'll see doctors get real about their experience. I do, however, think that because of social media, and this is me personally, I may be alone in this, but maybe you could also relate to, because social media is one of those things that if I'm consuming way too much, I fall into this trap of comparing myself and what I'm doing to what everyone's doing. And I'm seeing people achieve things in their like chapter 45 of their book of life. And I'm comparing my chapter 10 to theirs. And that is obviously not very healthy at all. And I just always remind myself about this quote that I once came across that says, comparison is the thief of happiness. And that is one of those like mantras I repeat to myself to just kind of like bring myself back down to the present moment. And I think in general, when you're like not feeling like you're ever enough, you're gonna have to like dig within and really have that like tough conversation with yourself about like, why am I feeling this way? And when you're asking yourself this, take a second, step back, and really evaluate like your chain of thoughts and why they have all kind of just led to this one feeling. I think this topic of never feeling like you're enough, gosh, take a shot every time I say never enough. So sorry. But I think this feeling in particular is one that really hits deeply if you are someone who has dealt with perfectionist tendencies or a recovering perfectionist, or you are a perfectionist. I have grown up most of my life dealing with perfectionist tendencies, and I know that at a young age I had these tendencies and they were not healthy. I remember I was in high school and I was just so hungry to be the best dancer I could be for myself. I knew I was not the best dancer technique-wise, but performance-wise, effort-wise, I really just wanted to be as best as I could. And I remember hitting this like great peak, but at the same time while I was doing it, I had gotten sick and I was still trying to train. And I was also going through like a lot of hardships at the time, and I just kept getting more and more sick, yet I was still training and I was still doing really well and I was being recognized for it. But because my health wasn't perfect and I was still doing well, I was getting very frustrated, and I knew this was going down a very bad path. And I decided to actually take a break from dancing and focus on like other creative endeavors. And I think that was like the first time as a young person I knew that like I was battling this perfectionism that would eventually kill me at some point, whether it was like mentally or physically. I also did know that dancing was an art for me, so I think being able to step away from not being the most perfect was kind of like freeing and liberating. But as you get older and you move that work ethic and that hustle into something else, these patterns continue to go. And that's really difficult. And I'll be quite honest, I think that is part of what did lead me to being a bit of a workaholic in my mid-20s. But we will talk about that another day. But going back to being a perfectionist, I think it really has hindered my spirit as an artist or as a creative like most of my life, just because as a perfectionist, like progress or doing well is not enough. Like you want to be perfect. You want everything to be perfect. I find that me wanting to be perfect and me wanting to create the number one best thing, like no flaws whatsoever, me wanting to put out this content that's absolutely a masterpiece or so well done or like the highest quality of video, yada yada yada, you get the point. That type of mentality though, that's really bad for a creative. That type of thinking is very bad for someone in a creative field, because it doesn't allow you to breathe. It doesn't allow you to make art for the sake of making art. It doesn't allow you to create just to create. It doesn't allow you to create something and just appreciate it for what it is. And it also means that like you're not allowing yourself to make mistakes. You're not allowing yourself to learn. You're not allowing yourself to just let things be. Like there is a standard that is set when you have this mindset, and it's one of the worst things that could happen, because you know you're like, if I'm not reaching this high standard I've set for myself, everything feels like a failure. And on top of that feeling of like everything I do has to be perfect, everything I do has to be so, I'm taking a beat right now because I do want to add this disclaimer. I live very close to a freeway, and all I can hear are the cars on the freeways, and there's a lot of loud bikes and all these things. And I'm so sorry, but I promise you this will change very soon. Back to my thought. When you're a perfectionist, not only are you trying to hit this unrealistic high standard every single time when you're trying to achieve and achieve and achieve, when you're trying to achieve, you are achieving and trying to reach this high standard for a reason, whether that is recognition, whether that is promotions, whether that is validation. You are trying to achieve this thing constantly. But the problem is, it's like once you've achieved this, the amount of stress you go through to achieve these high standards you have set for yourself, or maybe they've been set for you. Once you've gotten there, then there's that stress of maintaining and staying at this high. And that's just so unrealistic for so many people. And that's kind of one of those things where it's like you hit a high and then you're like staying up at this and you feel like you have to stay up at it all the time. And that's just not healthy. And I have found that for me to work like that, it's always led to burnout. And it's honestly quite sad to reach that point so often. I know a lot of it is just the mindset that I've had around work and performance and, you know, just trying to be as perfect as I possibly can be. It all comes down to, you know, asking yourself, when will anything ever be enough? Because at the end of the day, only you can decide that. especially as a creative. At the end of the day, unless like, you know, you're trying to hit benchmarks and numbers and all these things, you gotta ask yourself, like, at some point, what is enough for you and what does that look like? So we've been gathered here today to answer the following question: how to deal with feeling like you're never enough? This is a question I've asked myself so many times, just because when I have my little crash out moments and I am just feeling like I'm never going to be enough for certain people, and I have my little breakdown, I sit in my thoughts and I get all up in my head and I try to break it down. I try to find someone I can talk to, or I just lay in bed and just think about it. The first thing you have to do is just figure out the why. Ask yourself, why am I feeling this way? You have to figure out your why. You got to find out the reason why there is this disconnect between you and the work that you're doing. And this could look different for everybody. So sometimes it could be like a negative experience. Like maybe you are at work and you did a painting that you're commissioned for, and then the people who are viewing it are like, that's not what we were expecting. And it's something you put a lot of time and effort into. And, you know, that alone, that experience alone could make you feel so like, well, when is it ever going to be enough? Or that feeling alone could make you feel that way. Or it could simply just be you scrolling online way too much. You know, you're going down this doom scroll pattern like 3-4 times a week, and you're noticing like, I'm comparing myself to a lot of people. So maybe I like should not. I know that's like a really common one for me. I find that when I'm creating more and consuming less, my creative spirit feels way better. And this comparison aspect just is almost completely eliminated. I also want to touch on the fact that like, if you're creative and you work alone and you are alone for most of the work that you do, this could be a feeling you often feel because of how in your head you can be. When you don't have someone to talk to, or coworkers or things like that, like, you know, no one's really recognizing how hard you work. No one's there to appreciate the work you do. No one is there to talk you down from a moment of self-doubt. These are all things you have to consider when you're trying to figure out like, why am I feeling like I'm never enough? Because it could be a simple thing such as just I'm way too in my head, or I'm consuming too much content. So really take a second and just think about that, because the next step is all about figuring out like, what can I do to fix this? Like, where can I shift my mindset so that I'm no longer feeling this way? And I always recommend this like mindset shift as like your first plan of attack. Once you start implementing like all these tools, you're actually able to like talk yourself back down and just remind yourself like, okay, I had a moment where I just wasn't feeling aligned, and now I'm going to, you know, do what I got to do to put myself back on track. And this can look different for everybody. So for example, if you're having a negative client experience and it's like, oh, okay, that really hindered my spirit, you know, that really did something to me, I always want to remind you, if the why is something you can change, and once again, most of the time you can, when I'm talking about like shifting your mindset, my main thing is to just remember that you're like human. And I want you to have a conversation with yourself and view yourself as a human. So speak kinder to yourself, especially as a creative. A lot of people don't view us as people. A lot of the time we're viewed as machines. And it's really important for you to treat yourself like a person and just be as kind to yourself as possible and have grace. I am my own harshest critic. I'm so tough on myself, and I'm the first person to say like, you're not doing enough, you're not working hard enough, you're not doing X, Y, and Z. And you know what? That's probably true. But that doesn't mean I don't deserve to show myself some grace, because if I can't show myself some grace, if I can't be kind to myself, how do I expect other people to be that way? I wouldn't do that to a friend. You wouldn't do that to a friend. So don't do it to yourself. like when it comes to shifting your mindset, I like to keep a few mantras in my head and repeat these phrases to myself at times where I need the reminder and I need to replace a negative thought with a positive affirmation. Words can be so impactful to our brains, and it's really important that the words we speak to ourselves or the words that we think actually are words that we believe. And so if you're thinking these negative thoughts about yourself, especially as a creative, if you are reading hate comments, if you are reading bad reviews, this is really important for you to keep in mind that like positive words can have the same impact as negative words can. If you're so deep in the hole of feeling like you're never enough and you just don't have the brain capacity to shift your mindset, I get it. I'm impatient. I have felt that so many times where I'm just like, let me cry. Let me go off on someone because I'm losing my mind. This is another thing that really takes me from like 100 back down to 0. And it's just taking a second to step back and smell the roses. Be the person who appreciates your own work, because most of the time you're not going to get recognized for your accomplishments. And it sucks when everyone gets recognition except for you. And I feel like as creatives, that happens to us so often. So this is my reminder to you to give yourself your own damn flowers. Appreciate the art that you do. And on top of that, that's another reminder to make art you're proud of. Make stuff that you are okay with being out there in the world attached to you as a creative, because that's also really important in like building your self-esteem and making you a confident creative. And when you're also never feeling enough, and once again, I've spoken about how with myself, I tend to overthink and I will spiral into this mess of I am not enough, I will never be enough, and all that jazz. Well, another thing you can do is just simply disconnect. Take a break and go do something completely unrelated to your work as an artist. Just step away and get your mind off of it. Just do something that you know will uplift you, will make you feel confident, and something that will leave you feeling hopeful. Because I think when one starts to feel like you're never enough, there's almost this overwhelming feeling of defeat. Like there's nothing for you to accomplish in order to reach a standard that's been set for you. And I think by removing yourself from the environment that you're so stuck in and switching things up and just doing something different, I think that really could just allow you to catch your breath and recharge and rest. Because as an artist, rest is so important, and it is really, really, really important to take a break from the work that you do and just come back with a new perspective. The last piece of advice that I would give to anyone is to just talk yourself up. Be your own cheerleader and remind yourself who you are every single time you come back around to this feeling. Because I have found in my journey as a creative that like I come back around to this feeling of feeling like I'm never enough, whether it's for me, whether it's for others. This is a thought that I find myself battling with pretty often. And sometimes I go through this for like an hour. Sometimes I go through it for like 3 weeks and I fall into like a depressive hole. And that's just the reality of being a person with emotions and also being really passionate about the work that I do, that sometimes I attach really big emotions to the work that I do. And that is also something I have to remind myself, is that like when you're so invested in something and you're putting in all these things, like things start to become personal, and it's important to recognize like when you should take things personally and when it's not appropriate to do so. When I say be your own cheerleader, it goes back to what I had mentioned previously in the sense of you got to give yourself your own flowers. And this is going to be so important for you to establish, because when you come back around to this feeling, you have to remind yourself that you are the artist. You're in control. You're navigating your own journey. Therefore, it's, the same way you're responsible for taking accountability for yourself as an artist in the work that you do, you're also responsible for making sure that your mind is well. So that means taking the time to acknowledge that you've done a good job when you truly feel like you have. And that can have a very positive ripple effect in the sense of when you become so proud of the work that you do and you can recognize it and you can show up and be confident as an artist because of that feeling, that becomes infectious. And that can inspire the people around you. It can inspire your community. You never know. Speaking of community, it's really important that we also lean on the people around us and the ones who support us in times where you're not feeling the most confident. When you're feeling the most down, it's important to trust the people around you that you know uplift you and, allow them to, be a friend and be that person that you need for support. But once again, you're responsible for making those connections and reaching out to your community. So if you're like me and when things get tough and you're feeling the worst, like when your self-esteem is at an all-time low and you don't want to be around people, so what do? You hide and stay away from everyone. Don't do that. If you have any way to get out into your community and get a new perspective or take a break from what you're doing and focus on someone else, do it. Your community has your back, and I promise you there are people out there who want to support you. And throughout this episode I have kind of just touched on it, but this feeling of like I'm never enough, like nothing's ever going to be enough, that is a normal human feeling. It is a feeling so many humans feel, and I know there's so many creatives out there who have felt this way. And this is your reminder to just feel the damn thing. Don't shove these emotions down and try to bottle them up and let them explode at the worst possible time. It's just not worth it. And if you're like me and you experience this feeling quite a bit, it really is important to just acknowledge it when you feel it, because self-doubt, not being confident in yourself, not being proud, feeling so lost in your head because you just feel like nothing's ever going to be enough or you're never going to be enough. The feelings are tough. Those are things that are not fun to feel. And it's really important to just acknowledge it and feel it, because you are only human. And I always find that when I go through these ebbs and flows of this feeling, I always come out the other side feeling so much more aligned with where I need to be as a person. And I find that this also gets me back on track to creating and doing what I want to do. And that's the goal. I just want to be well enough to create and do the things that I want to do. I want to feel good about the work that I do. I want to feel good about trying. I want to feel good about trying something new and it not doing well, or doing something that I'm scared to do, but still doing it because I feel good about myself. I feel confident in myself. And like I've said, this is probably something you're going to feel quite a bit throughout your life. And from one creative to another, I just want to let you know, I am with you. I have felt it all. I still feel it all, and I'm here to support you. So if you want to talk, slide into my DMs on Instagram, or if you can relate to anything I touched on in this episode, or if you have any advice for dealing with feeling like you're never enough, leave a comment below. This episode is one that, as I have been recording it, I feel a little bit anxious talking about it, just because I don't see a lot of creatives sharing their negative experiences when it comes to it. And this is really vulnerable, but this is also why I started this podcast in the first place, because I want to have conversations that are not conversations you normally would have if you're grabbing coffee with a friend. And when I was writing the notes for this episode, I found that at first I didn't know how to go about this topic. And if I'm being quite honest, when I talked about it, it still kind of felt a little all over the place, but at the same time not, because this is a complex feeling and this looks different for everybody experiences. Some people have probably never experienced this, or they have, but it looks different from how I have experienced it. And that's the best part about being human, is that no two people are ever really going to be alike. I felt like this episode is really good. I feel like this episode is also a good segue into talking about imposter syndrome. In my head, I feel like this feeling of never being enough is part of a weird cycle you experience as a creative. And one of those is you've started and you're working and you're like, oh, I'm never enough. and then you get over that hump and you're doing well and you're succeeding, but then all of a sudden you hit this other point in life where you're like, oh my gosh, I'm succeeding, I'm doing well, all these things, getting recognized, but yet I feel like I don't deserve it. Those are two mindsets I constantly battle as a creative, and I would love to touch on just the feeling of imposter syndrome. So if you're interested in me touching on that topic, please let me know, because if I had $1 for every time I felt imposter syndrome in the last 3 years of my life, I'd still have to work, but I felt it enough where I'd have at least $5. But anywho, that is all for this episode. I appreciate you all for listening. If you're watching this on YouTube, hey. But I'll talk to you guys all in the next episode. Bye.